Hi folks, Josh Wolf with Wolf Vintage Watches here. Welcome to my shop. In this video, I'll be servicing a 1972 Hamilton Dateline A-596 in stainless steel. Let's get into it. The first step in disassembly is going to be removing the case back. And for this watch, it's a screw-down stainless steel case back. And I can remove the crown and stem and the weighted rotor. And these are the case screws, and the eagle-eyed among you will notice that there's only one when there should be two in this particular watch. And then the hands are removed with these hand levers and a piece of plastic to protect the dial. And now I'll remove the dial by removing these little levers that hold the dial feet secure. And put them back in place so they're not damaged during the cleaning process. And continuing on the dial side, I can remove the hour wheel and the minute work cock. And the minute wheel and setting wheel come out. And the date corrector. And the date indicator guard and intermediate date wheel are removed, as is the date indicator. And next up are the jumper spring and the jumper. The jumper is what interacts with the date indicator. And the date indicator driving wheel. And the kingpin with the driving wheel. Now for the keyless works, we can remove all the components of the keyless works. Here I'm protecting the yoke spring from flying out with a little pick here. I can grab the yoke and the clutch wheel and winding pinion and the date corrector operating lever. And then out comes the dial rests. These are, little half circle pieces of metal that ride in that little groove there along the top of the movement, and it's what keeps the dial just off of the movement and enough space for the date indicator to function underneath. Now on the watchmaker side, I can remove the automatic framework. And here I'm letting down the mainspring. I put a little tension on the barrel and then move the crown wheel out of the way and release the tension on the mainspring and unscrew the ratchet wheel screw there. And the crown wheel is held in by a reverse threaded screw. And out come the click and the click spring. And now I can remove the barrel bridge. That's secured to the movement with 3 screws. The train wheel bridge comes off next, being very careful not to break any of the pivots. And the train of wheels comes out along with the barrel. Here I'm removing the top balance jewel setting. There's actually 2 parts of this jewel, which will be cleaned individually. And I'm putting the shock back in place, again to protect it during the cleaning process. And here I can remove the balance cock and the balance. And the pallet cock and the pallet will be removed next. And that completes the disassembly of the movement. And here I can remove the barrel cap. And I can remove the barrel arbor and then begin to remove the mainspring itself. The best way to do this is to kind of get it started and then work the mainspring out, holding the mainspring into the barrel with your thumbs, and then with your nails kind of walk it out. And then with the magic of editing, really speed it up and go much quicker and get it done. And now I can disassemble the automatic works, starting with this lower automatic bridge that holds all the various gears in place. And the reduction gear gets removed, then the pawl winding wheels, and then finally the ratchet wheel driving gear. This model uses an acrylic crystal with a compression ring on the inside, and I can go ahead and pop that out. And then I'm also, in this case, going to remove the compression ring because I need to polish the crystal. There's a few blemishes that I'm going to polish, and so I remove the compression ring to make sure I get that polished up nice and clean. And now on to reassembly. And I first start by reinstalling the mainspring, and that starts with some braking grease on the inside of the barrel wall. This helps protect the barrel, but it also provides enough friction between the barrel wall and the mainspring so that it gets its full wind, but then also as it starts to overwind, the mainspring will slip a little bit, preventing damage to the watch. And then I use these vintage mainspring winders to wind up the mainspring. And you can see how it's packed in there. And then I reinstall the mainspring into the barrel. And I can lubricate and install the barrel arbor. Off camera, I lubricated the mainspring with a little bit of natural grease. It doesn't take very much, just a little bit to prevent rusting and the mainspring from sticking to itself. And then I can reinstall the barrel cap. And just using my tweezers, I can snap the barrel cap back in place. Now that the mainspring is reinstalled into the barrel, I can begin assembling the movement itself, and I begin with the train of wheels, starting with the escape wheel and the intermediate wheel, then the third wheel. Here I'm going to lubricate the sweep second hand wheel before installing it, since I won't have access to it once it is installed in the movement. It goes through that center tube there. And now I can install the train bridge. Sometimes getting all four of the pivot holes lined up can be an exercise in patience. This one actually happens to fall into place quite easily. And I test that the train of wheels moves freely before I reinstall the screws and tighten the train bridge back down. And I can lubricate the lower hole for the barrel and reinstall the barrel and the barrel bridge to hold everything together. Sometimes it takes a little bit of manipulation to get all of the various parts to line up. There's a couple of alignment posts, and obviously the barrel arbor needs to fit through the hole. And then I can secure it with the 3 screws. Next are the click spring and the click, and I lubricate where the click is going to sit a little bit. And I can lubricate this oblong post that the crown wheel rides on. It's oblong to allow the crown wheel to move as the watch is either being wound manually or wound with the automatic works. And again, the crown wheel screw is reverse thread, so turning it left to tighten it up. And we're going to lubricate the top hole for the barrel arbor and reinstall the ratchet wheel. And in goes the pallet fork, which is held in place by the pallet cock. This can be a delicate procedure. You really need to make sure that everything is lined up before tightening it down. It's very easy to break the pallet fork pivot. And here I'm putting a little bit of tension on the mainspring so I can test the pallet fork. Before I install the balance, I'm going to go ahead and lubricate the pivot as well as the pallet stones. And now I can install the balance and the balance cock. I make sure that the impulse jewel is on the right side of the pallet fork and kind of roll the balance in. Get everything lined up, give it a little shake. Because there's some tension in the mainspring already, we start to see the balance swing, which is good. And now I can reinstall the top balance jewel set, and I'll open up the shock. Here I'm putting a little bit of lubrication on the end stone. I'll put the jewel setting on top of the end stone, and with capillary action the two pieces will suck together, and then I can reinstall this entire assembly back into the balance cock and close up the shock. These shocks are very, very delicate little pieces of brass. You have to be very careful when you're manipulating those. And I can lubricate the train of wheels, which completes the reassembly of the watchmaker side of the movement. Moving now to the dial side, we first need to talk about the setting lever. The setting lever that came with this watch when I purchased it is incorrect. If we freeze it and zoom in, I can highlight the setting lever in red here. It is supposed to interact with the part highlighted in green here, which is the date corrector operating lever. As you can see, there's a gap between those two parts, and so there was no way for those two parts to interact with each other. In addition to the setting lever being incorrect, the stem was also the wrong stem. Looking at the stem that came with the watch, you can see that the end of the stem is square. This particular movement is supposed to have a helical stem, which you can see here. And here's a closer look at the incorrect setting lever, the shorter one on the bottom, and then the correct setting lever that does belong in the movement. Obviously, I was fortunate enough to have the spare parts laying around. It just makes me wonder what the person who was last in this watch was thinking. It seems like they had to work pretty hard to install an incorrect stem and an incorrect setting lever. Here I'm lubricating the winding pinion and the clutch wheel, and installing the winding pinion and clutch wheel. Maybe. There we go. You can see I already installed the crown on the correct stem, and we'll go into more details on that later. Now I can install the correct setting lever. You can get an idea of how everything is supposed to work. I'm installing the date corrector operating lever here. Now that I have the correct setting lever installed, I can pause it and zoom in and highlight it in red, and then highlight the date corrector operating lever in green. And you can see with the correct setting lever how much further over it is, and now it can interact properly with the date corrector operating lever. And again, just lubricating where the parts are going to interact with each other. And I can install the yoke. And the yoke spring. This can be a little fiddly sometimes. Sometimes the yoke will slip out of the clutch wheel groove. So you just need to be aware of that and go back and set that back in place if it does slip out. Which in this case it did. So I'll get that fixed up. Touch more grease. And the setting lever spring goes in place. And once I move that out of the way, I can finish lubricating that. And I'll slow the video down to normal speed, and you can see how the setting lever and the date corrector operating lever all interact together. Adding a little bit of lubrication to the posts. The canny pinion with driving wheel, the minute wheel, and the setting wheel all get installed. And now I'll lubricate for the date corrector and fit the date indicator in. Next up are the date jumper and the date jumper spring. I made a little mistake here. Ordinarily, I'd want to put the date driving wheel in first before the date indicator, but it's no issue just to slide it in underneath there and get it into place. The date indicator guard and the intermediate date wheel are installed. I make sure I wiggle the intermediate date wheel around a little bit to make sure that the teeth all line up before I secure it down. You run the risk of breaking some of the teeth if you don't have everything lined up before you really tighten it down. The minute work cock can come on. This part protects the keyless works as well as holds the other side of the date indicator in place. I can test the date correcting wheel. Here I'm just opening up the dial feet levers. And then I'm going to install the hour wheel as well as the dial rests. These rests just fit right back in those little grooves. I can reinstall that awesome dial. And close up the dial feet levers to hold the dial securely. Test the manual winding function. Everything looks like it's working good. And I'm going to test the quick set date. Looks good. Here I'm setting the time to midnight, so it's just going to click over, and I'm going to install the handset. First to go on is the hour hand, obviously. Here I'm just checking for clearance between the hour hand and the applied Hamilton logo. And I want it as close as possible because I need to make room for the minute hand and the second hand. And speaking of the minute hand, that gets installed next. And I just get it lined up and I use this hand pressing tool to push it into place. It's pressure fit. And again, here I'm checking for clearance not only between the minute hand and the hour hand, but also the minute hand and those applied hour markers. The hour markers are pretty far off the dial, so we really want to make sure that there's clearance between those and the minute hand. And I can install the second hand. And again, checking for clearance, making sure that the second hand clears the minute hand. And everything looks good. Now we can reassemble the automatic works. And a little bit of grease for the ratchet wheel driving gear. And we can install the pawl winding wheels. And in goes the reduction gear. Holding everything in place is the lower automatic bridge. And I test it, make sure everything's working fine. Here I'm lubricating the weighted rotor. I can reinstall that onto the automatic framework. And I also want to keep moving this rotor around as I tighten the screw down, again to make sure that the teeth are lined up and I'm not crushing the teeth between each other. Off camera, I polished up the acrylic crystal and reinstalled the compression ring, and we can install those back into the case. I want to make sure I clean up any bits of dirt or dust that may have made it onto the crystal before I recase the movement. And here I'm installing the case screws. I'm going to drop the movement into place. And before I tighten up the case screws, I'm going to dry fit the crown and stem to make sure everything is lined up properly. Now we need to address the stem that is much too long. Using my calipers, I'm going to measure between the end of the crown and the case. And I can hold the stem with my pin vise. Using a marker, I can indicate how much of the stem I want to remove. It's always best to sneak up on this, so you want to remove less than you think you need to. You can always remove more of the stem, but if you cut it too short, then you need to toss the stem and grab a new one. And this is a good example of why you take off less than you think you need to. I thought I wasn't removing enough, and it turns out I nailed it exactly right on the first try. Now I can lubricate the stem. And finally reinsert it back into the watch. Now we can reinstall the automatic works. Here I'm testing for clearance and that the automatic works actually works. And we can screw the case back on. Tighten it down with the blue rubber ball. Some final testing with the hand winding, quick set date, time setting. Everything is in order. To see this and other vintage watches I've restored, please check out my website at wolfvintagewatches.com. I'll leave a link in the description below as well. As always, I appreciate you watching and thank you for liking and commenting. Be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss any of my videos. See you next time. Bye.